Awesome. Okay. Well, hi everyone. My name is Mackenzie. I work at Match.com as a UX engineer on the desktop and mobile platforms. I always found a lot of meaning in my work. Like I'm a soft soul, and the idea of helping users find love meant a lot to me. When I started learning more about web accessibility, I realized that unless I became an advocate and a proponent for change, I wasn't really helping everybody find love. So today I work closely with our accessibility auditors to combine solutions for WCAG, which is Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG failures, and also keeping user experience in mind, which is what I'm going to talk about today.
Before you go on, Mackenzie, if you don't mind, if anybody has questions, would you like for them to interrupt you? Would you like for them to put something in the chat? How would you like to handle that?
Please raise your hand in the Zoom chat and I will stop. I've also left time for questions at the end. I have a really nice slide that says questions on it.
Excellent.
Yeah, I have the Zoom window up, so I should be able to see hands.
Well,
okay.
Mackenzie, thank you for doing your own introduction, which is totally fine. And
David, what David's is about to say is he's falling down on the job because he was supposed to do the introduction.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Well, to be fair,
No.
I gave him a really bad introduction because I had no idea what to say until I actually got started writing this.
It's okay. Totally fine. Go ahead. Yeah. Yes, Russell, what were you going to say?
Okay, let me make sure that I have chat open then.
I also have it open, and probably some of the other officers do. So we'll be able to check and see if there's anything and come up with a good time to say, so Mackenzie, here's a question that someone would like to ask.
Greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Sure.
Also, I'll share my slides and also my script at the end of this in case you would like to read it again. If I'm speaking too fast, please let me know. And I can slow it down a little bit. So our agenda today is going to be a brief introduction into accessibility and how we really define it. From there, I'm going to give you a small coverage of WCAG regulations and the consequences of failing to comply with laws or regulations. But first, I want to ask you a few questions just to answer in your head, every one of you. So take a few seconds to process everyone as I ask them. So the first one is, what does accessibility mean to you? What do you think of when I say disability? Finally, what are some tools we have to help the disabled? Keep your answers in mind as we progress through the next few slides. To get started, I want to share a quote from Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the World Wide Web and W3C director. He says, "The power of the web is in its universality. Access by everyone, regardless of disability, is an essential aspect." This really resounds with me, and it resounds with my work because what I do impacts people's lives so profoundly. So the web is fundamentally designed to work for all people, whether the hardware, software, language, location, or ability. When the web meets this goal, it is accessible to people with a diverse range of hearing, movement, sight, and cognitive disability. Thus, the impact of disability, it's radically changed on the web because the web removes barriers to communication and interactions that a lot of people face in the physical world. However, when websites, applications, technologies, or tools are badly designed, they can create new barriers that exclude people from using the web, which, as we just said, was designed to help people with disabilities. Accessibility it's essential for developers and organizations that want to create high quality websites, applications, or web tools and not exclude people from using their products and services. So back to the questions I asked earlier. Does anybody want to share what came to mind when you thought of accessibility?
Just whatever tools you might have to be able to get to something, whatever get to something means.
Mm-hmm. What about tools we have to help those with disabilities?
Depends on the disability.
Exactly. So,
Right.
so let's talk about the actual definition of accessibility. The Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines accessibility as a lot of things. It has about 5 definitions, and the last one is the one that's most relevant to us. The last definition is easily used or accessed by people with disabilities. So that last line is what I found a lot of people think of when they think of accessibility in the context of our work as developers. We help the disabled to use screen readers or those who rely on keyboard navigation. When asked about general accessibility outside of the dev world, most people think of like wheelchair ramps or parking spots. But let's consider other assistive tools at our disposal. Is your vision impaired? Do you wear glasses or contacts? Does that mean you have a disability? Maybe you haven't considered it before because of your glasses, and glasses are such a widely used assistive tool. Your environment works right for you because it is compatible with that technology, much like a wheelchair to a ramp. But what if it wasn't compatible? Imagine you went to a website that didn't work with glasses, had some weird 3D effects going on. That would be really weird. It would be frustrating, and very suddenly that assistive technology you rely on isn't compatible with your environment anymore. And suddenly that disability is very relevant. That's why disability is not a function of the user. It's a function of the interaction between that user with their environment. This issue is the barrier that stops the user from enjoying our work. It's also important to think beyond physical impairments, beyond screen readers and keyboard navigation, which honestly is the big part of WCAG requirements does revolve around keyboard navigation and screen readers and labels. But when we talk about accessibility from a UX standpoint, it goes way beyond that. There are cognitive disabilities like those on the autism spectrum, users with ADHD or other neurological disorders. Here at Match, when we are connecting users or having them submit a bio about themselves, we offer prompts and suggestions to users who might be struggling to fill that out or might have problems with social skills. That's a form of accessibility. That's a form of opening up your website to users who, they might be on the autism spectrum. They might have problems understanding social cues. That's a form of accessibility that you might not even realize. So I don't want to lecture you on WCAG requirements, their grading levels, or how to meet them, but I would like to touch on the laws related to accessibility, simply because I often find this is the driving force that for accessibility changes within tech companies. So I want you to be aware of them too, because we'll talk about that later. So I'm sorry if this map is really low quality. I'll include a link to it after this presentation as part of my notes. The dark red on this map signifies countries that have adopted WCAG 2.0 regulations. The light red are those who have recommended or referenced WCAG 2.0 in their accessibility laws. The gray countries are those who have adopted WCAG 1.0. Countries that are white have not made any stance related to WCAG. So some US specific laws related to web accessibility are the Americans with Disabilities Acts, the 508C, the US Rehabilitation Act, and all of those reference WCAG 2.1, which is considered the gold standard. If you can meet WCAG 2.1 suggestions, your site is usually cleared as legally okay. Internationally, it varies by reasons, and this can cause a lot of problems for international companies. And with the spike of remote work in 2020 and the huge shift for remote work in 2021, we're facing an unprecedented amount of lawsuits centered around companies not meeting accessibility standards. And these are big numbers. WebAIM, a research report, which they actually run yearly, it's really interesting, found that 98% of the top million websites had detectable WCAG failures. WCAG failures means your website is subject to legal action. WCAG failures are a big deal. It doesn't just stop there. The internal tooling that companies have for their employees, any sites they have for their employees, are also subject to employee discrimination lawsuits if they are not accessible to employees. So there are a lot of legal problems you want to keep in mind when you're dealing with accessibility. But how do we change this? It involves getting the gang back together. We have to figure out, how can we make an impact on accessibility and user experience when accessibility is often thought of just as a legal problem? Unfortunately, if I came here and said there are perfect solutions for tackling accessibility from a user perspective, I would be lying to you. There's not one solution, because every site, every application, and every project, they're built on different frameworks, different ideas, different initiatives, different design. But with every project, we have to take our thoughts and our designs beyond WCAG. We have to focus on making every user have an enjoyable experience on our application. So I want to walk through how we can make those changes, starting with you, your development team, your product team, your design team, and hopefully the stakeholders. So it begins with, a cross-team initiative. It's never going to happen with one person driving it. You're always going to kind of have to get people on board. But when you create this singular goal between developers, designers, and product, you can start moving towards that accessibility first approach, and it'll be at the forefront of your mind when you're making new features, new applications, new sites, new anything, because if everybody's on the same page, then it's easy to work it into your process. But the first step of that is awareness. Web accessibility is very much a new thing because it didn't really come on the radar until the past 3 years, starting with a very big lawsuit with Domino's of all sites. And it got big in 2020, and now it's getting very big in 2021. It's becoming a rush, but it is still very new. And a lot of times teams still only think of it when something bubbles up from legal. Making sure each team is aware of the importance of web accessibility to truly provide the best user experience for all users, it'll be easier to get into that accessibility first goal, because it's easy to fall back on the legal requirements and fix things as they pop up. But to truly call yourself a web developer and uphold the meaning of the web, with that quote we touched on in the beginning, we have to build a great user experience for everyone. The second step here is grace. Web accessibility is fundamentally difficult. WCAG has admitted in drafting its 3.0 proposition that the guidelines are too difficult. They are not beginner friendly and not even for experts. They're hard to understand and they are hard to implement. There are going to be mistakes, but when we're focusing on web accessibility, we have to foster learning and growth always. It's always best to, do that with kind of everything, but especially when you're dealing with something so new and something that's so tied to legalities, you want to show that kind of patience and grace with people as they pick it up. That's only going to encourage them to continue down this path. And it starts with you. And don't be discouraged. Getting started can be really scary, especially since I just said the WCAG 2.1 documentation is very intimidating. Don't be discouraged. Whether you've been around since WCAG 1.0 or you're just dipping your toes into semantic HTML, don't be discouraged. You're developing your own voice and becoming an advocate for individuals who often get lost in the noise, or even worse, there's no representation of these individuals on development teams, product teams, or design teams. Do your best, learn from your mistakes, and be patient. Still a big new thing for a lot of people. And be the change you want to see. On my team, because I'm working so closely with our auditors, I'm beginning to work in accessibility into our refinement of our features as the first thing. If we see problems, we bring them to our auditors and we make that our first step. There are no other teams currently that do that, but just by doing that in the first place, I'm hoping more people will pick it up because that means, less problems in the long run. The next thing is not to stress over imperfection. Incorrect or badly implemented accessibility is worse than no accessibility. WebAIM has a quote I like, which is the first use of ARIA, which is an HTML tool to help with accessibility, is not to use it. There are huge communities out there that are eager to help. I'll provide one of my favorite Slack groups at the end of the presentation. They're dedicated to all things web accessibility. They have articles, research, how the heck do I do this? And they have a huge beginner section as well if you just want to say, hey, really basic question, what's going on here? But what about after that? Then we move on to the team. I want to stress that training and knowledge share is the best thing to go forward with. You do not want to knowledge silo your accessibility knowledge on your team. So I can suggest trainings and knowledge share. If you learn something, share it. Create a document, create a Slack channel, something, anything for your reference. Lean into learning about it. Look for opportunities for free talks and bring that back to your team. I recently followed a guy on Twitter, and it was really funny because he actually turns out to be on the W3C contributors for WCAG, and I tweet him questions all the time. So it's as simple as finding a community and finding a way of communication that works for you. Invest heavily at the beginning of your cycles. When you're working on the very beginnings of your wireframes and your ideas, think, is this accessible? Work that in. I know we hate meetings, but maybe have a section towards the end of your meeting when you're talking about these projects to go through and say, what about contrast? How does the page flow? Is this copy too weird? Is this page hard to understand? Does this page have an H1, which every page needs? Slowly but surely, if you do that, it'll become the norm because you're solving so many problems in the beginning. People will catch on. People will say, hey, this is a pretty good idea. and helping your team identify basic warning signs, flashy pages, incorrect headings, more problems like that. When devs understand the little pieces that make up a large problem, it's easier to chip away at the boulder. When devs understand the problems, not only can they make the solutions, but they can bring that solution in future features going forward. It's kind of like just spreading knowledge. And suddenly you have everybody who knows every page needs a heading, that those go to design. Design knows pages need headings, and like disseminating that information. It starts with you. It always starts with you when you're dealing with this stuff. And moving on to product and your product managers, I found the best way to get product on board is becoming solution focused. Bring options. Like, we can add a heading here that'll help users understand what's going on. Or if we simplify this text, it'll help all users understand the meaning of the page. Offer alternatives. For example, the other day I suggested we remove a splash page on our website that after 3 seconds, it auto redirected a user to another page. That's an accessibility failure because users who can't read fast or can't process information quickly are moved to another page before they can figure out what's going on. I said, hey, what if we take that out and we just add a got it button? And they click it and then they go wherever. They said, oh, cool, that's fine. It's simple. It can be as simple as that. Letting product know also about the fundamental problems like focus traps, interstitial pop-ups that drive your eyes around different parts of the page, things that block your user from enjoying your site, weird colors, features that aren't really explained. When you begin to feed product that information, they can start implementing that into their future projects. And I can say from experience, you will have to give them that information a lot, but you'll start seeing it pay off. You'll start seeing product managers who say, hey, yeah, we probably don't need this pop-up here. We can find a different way to implement it. And that also extends to copywriters, because I mentioned cognitive disabilities. Let your copywriter know about that too. Very dense text. A lot of times you'll have legal text that is required to be, like legalese, very dense, but that doesn't mean all your text has to be dense. It's the dissemination of this information about accessibility as it relates to user experience. And the more people know, the easier these projects become. And you'll handle all of these big issues at the beginning so that they don't become very big legal issues at the end. So on to design. How should you approach your design team about this? Sometimes this might be your most difficult hill to climb. It's probably going to feel like Sisyphus sometimes. In my experience, one of the best things you can provide to design are tools that they can just use while they work. So there are contrast tools to check text weight, text color, and background color. Another tool I really enjoy is one that simulates varying degrees of color blindness, blurred vision, or even dyslexia. There are even built-in design tools for applications like Figma and Abstract, which I have used quite extensively. I know there are more design applications out there, but those were the two most prominent that I found working. So they are built in there and designers can use them. Letting designers know about how pages should flow semantically. You might think that designers have a knowledge of like semantic HTML, but sometimes they might just not. Sometimes they might just not. So teaching them about heading order, about images, alt images, what images does the page need, icons that can be confusing, overwhelming designs, all of those as they relate to images and graphics can be a nightmare. If you have a chart, it might look very fancy and cool, but how are you going to translate that to a user who is blind, visually impaired, cognitively impaired? You might have a table that displays information in a really cool way, but how can users who are disabled have the same great experience as the users who can comprehend this table perfectly? Semantics. So, and then most importantly, I would say is a design system. The design system will help the developers, the product team, and the design team in creating pages that are enjoyable for all users. Deciding together with all teams a color palette that meets contrast, font weights that meet requirements, colors that won't be jarring for users with visual disabilities, and consistency for your site will change your world. It will literally change your world. When you begin your UX design with all users in mind, you face fewer accessibility issues, and you can truly say, I'm helping the web become what it was truly meant to be. Lastly, I'm going to talk about stakeholders. Stakeholders might be the most difficult people to get on board because not only do they have to deal with features, meeting their yearly marks, they're the ones worried about the lawsuits. So that's probably what they focus on because they don't want to lose money. So achieving buy-in from the top is great, but it's difficult. My CEO, he actually has an open door policy. He's very nice. And more than once, I have almost wanted to charge into his office and say, we need to offer all users the opportunity to find love. And I don't suggest taking such a dramatic route as I would, but there are a few things you can bring to the table to help get the stakeholders on your side. First, implementing UX for disabled users rather than focusing on the legalities of accessibility will help drive innovation. When you have accessible features and products, you're going to solve unanticipated problems just by working those features in. You're going to enhance your brand. Diversity and inclusion efforts are so important to business success, and they're accelerated with clear, well-integrated accessibility commitment. You're going to extend your market reach. The global market of people, according to the W3C, is over 1 billion people with a spending power of more than 6 trillion. Accessibility often improves the online experience for all these users, and then they will spend more money on your accessible application. You're also going to minimize that legal risk. Most countries will have laws requiring the digital access, the digital accessibility of your website, and an issue like that, bringing that to the table will definitely increase the legal concern. You can consider running your application through several tools to simulate a disabled experience. Something like the Wave Accessibility tool, which is a Chrome add-on, which you can run on any page of your website, and it will flag every single WCAG failure on your website. You can use VoiceOver with keyboard navigation to show how your website flows for somebody who has to rely on a keyboard and VoiceOver to experience your site. You can also use a screen reader tool without sharing your screen to simulate your website without vision. But I think the most powerful voice you can bring, greater than our own, is that of a disabled user themselves. The logistics of this are probably going to be really difficult to work out, but there's really no better way to show how rough UX is for those who are left behind by really modern, sleek designs. These are the people that Tim Berners-Lee hoped would benefit the most from the web. Unfortunately, all of those things might not be enough. If it does come down to it, bring in the law, bring in the lawsuits, show them what they might be liable for. Having an application site or product that meets WCAG requirements is a good starting point, even if you feel the UX is not where you want it to be. From there, you can springboard into making your work a living, breathing piece of art that anybody and everybody can experience just as you want them to, disabled or not. So if you do have to make the sacrifice of cutting corners to meet WCAG 2.0 or 2.1 so you don't get slammed with lawsuits, sometimes you have to bite the bullet and do that, but don't lose hope. There will be a time where you can keep working at this. It starts with you. You have to be that voice of change. So that is the end of my presentation right now. I ran a little shorter than I intended to, so we have plenty of time for questions or talking about my experience working with auditors or how Match has dealt with some accessibility problems.
Why haven't you walked into your CEO's office?
I'm very nervous. I like to imagine there's a little chicken inside me that runs around, and that's my anxiety, and I have to catch it sometimes. And thinking of going into my CEO's office makes my chicken run around, but I'm really considering it. I'm very much considering it. The more and more I have to cut corners, the more I want to say, hey, we talk all the time about how we want everyone to find love. Let's commit to that. Let's commit. No. No, I like my job.
I don't think Hassan will take it too personally.
He's a good guy. Yeah.
So other than things like header tag, like header and footer tags and alt text and stuff like that, are there other specific things that one might do on web pages to, like, if you're talking from an HTML specifically kind of standpoint, what are the other, are there other things to kind of think about with the markup to get you there? Like, I mean, short of like putting like label tags next to input boxes and stuff like that, or what are there some like general ideas that one might use when you're doing markup to kind of deal with that?
So what I like to do when I start designing a page is I'll actually take a sheet of notebook paper and I'll draw out how I want my site to be. There are, you'll have your main, you have your header, you have your footer, you have a sides, you have sections, you have articles. All of these HTML elements mean different things, but all of them are useful to the user. There's 3 different kinds of lists you can use: an ordered list, and definitions list. It's a bit intensive, but you can make a table accessible. It's oftentimes better not to, but semantic HTML offers you so many tools that if you can take those into consideration in the beginning, you won't have to. Another good example is images. It takes a bit of skill to be able to recognize whether an image is something that, here, I'm going to stop my share really quick so I can show you an example. An image is something that you should provide an alt tag for, if it's something you should hide. So if, for example, I was on Match.com and I saw this logo, that is something I would want to give alt text because that is important for the user. But if I was to put on a virtual background that was this tropical background, what you see here, it doesn't add to the user experience. It doesn't give any more context to my Zoom call. It's just a beach. So this is when you would add empty alt text. And you have to look at these pictures and consider, is this something that adds to the page, or is it just something to make it look pretty? So I would say making that wireframe of your website, seeing how you want to split it up, how you actually want your content to sit, and then plan that out with semantic elements. Sometimes you'll end up, if you don't plan it out, you'll end up with something we call div soup, which is a div in a div in a in a in a in a div. And I would also say you don't always have to rely on semantic HTML. There are cases where ARIA is a valid tool to use for your website. It's just important to make sure you have exhausted all options before you move on to ARIA.
So what kind of websites does, from a legal perspective, WCAG apply to? I mean, technically, anyone can be sued by anybody, but reasonably speaking, David's personal portfolio website, which, as far as I know, doesn't exist. Would it apply to that?
So I actually have a little piece on these. Let me find it because I wrote it out okay. So when we're talking about WCAG and we're talking about the U.S. Rehabilitation Act of 1973 and the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, many of these laws determine that public and commercial locations must be accessible. This is where you got the addition of handicap parking, wheelchair ramps, auto opening doors. But courts determined that websites also fall under the umbrella of public and commercial locations. So if you have a commercial website, it definitely applies to you. If you have a what was the other one? Public site. I mean, I have a playground site where I just do random stuff on when I want to test stuff out. Someone could come to my website and say, hey, this isn't accessible. I can't, do anything with this. It's usually thrown out. So you're mostly going to be worried about government sites, websites for companies that they're not selling something, but they have like a homepage. Federal sites like .gov sites, .edu sites. That's another really big one. The University of Miami got sued for that.
Yeah, that I would assume. Obviously, government would be one of the top ones. And education is often related to that. So
yeah, there's actually a really interesting movement going on talking about the accessibility of college courses, especially with things that have gone online, problems with captioning, problems with, video quality, pre-recorded stuff. And even within, in-person classrooms, there's currently a really big movement going on about that I've been kind of peeking in. I'm not in college right now, but I've been peeking in because I think that kind of development is really interesting. So, I mean, even outside of, web accessibility, which is like what I was talking about here, the push for accessibility everywhere is huge right now. The ball is rolling. So don't be surprised if you see some more stuff popping up.
How much effort do you think companies in general are putting into like line of business apps being more accessible? Or like, are you seeing any of that? And I'm speaking, of course, as a kind of as a tech owner of line of business apps primarily.
So what I normally see is people always go for the legal first. They go bare minimum. What do we need to do so we don't lose money? I know I have been at a company that did get sued. It was just huge cleanup, cut corners, bare minimum, so we would not get sued again. I know a lot of companies are facing similar deadlines because of laws passed. I think there was a really big one in California. So a lot of times it is based on legal stuff, which offers a bit of a problem because you also have a big push in companies for diversity, now with people of color, minorities, women, especially in like the tech sector. And when you think about diversity, but you're not taking into account disability, you can't really say we're diverse. So you get in this really, really weird conundrum, which is mostly the thing that makes me want to march up to the CEO door of how can we say we're diverse if we're not accessible? How can we say we're providing the best user experience if we're cutting corners for accessibility? And so that is the hardest part, is getting buy-in from the top to say this isn't just about legalities. This is about giving us the best user experience we can for these people, especially for me at Match. Like I'm so bought into that whole lovey-dovey stuff. Like one time I got a bug for a Chromebook. And I got this screen share of a woman who was unable to access the website. And as soon as I saw her face, I knew I was just over. I was like, this woman, she's here. This is a real person I'm seeing, and I have to help her. And I was like, QA, I need a Chromebook. They got a Chromebook just for me to fix this bug. And I am so bought into that idea of love and helping people. So when, I started getting into the web accessibility, it just kind of like smacked me in the face that, can I say that I am truly helping everybody find love if I am not being the loudest voice I can for the people who aren't really represented? So that's why I keep saying it starts with you, because how it started with me was, I was interested in web accessibility. I liked it. I thought it was interesting. And when we started, fixing some legal problems, I saw some stuff I was concerned about. And I said, this is wrong. This is wrong. I went to my manager and I told him, this was really scary. This was wrong. And so I had a meeting with him, the main developer working with accessibility, and the CTO, which was great. And we came up with a solution. We said, hey, we're going to fix what we can. If we have to cut corners, we have to cut corners. That's what I was saying. If you have to focus on the legalities, that's sometimes just what you have to do. But we make follow-up tickets. We're following through. We're working with our auditors to meet the middle ground of like, what can we do to pass our audit while not sacrificing user experience? And it's kind of, balancing the timeline we're on, but it is a lot of work. But this is me getting on a soapbox. But to me, calling myself a UX engineer means that I design UX for everybody, not just people who can perfectly see this beautiful website I've built. And I have an obligation as a UX engineer to do that. Like, that's part of the job. I can't just like not do that because it's sometimes really difficult. So
Is there some good either online tools or open source tools that you can use to be able to kind of get I'll say a scorecard, maybe scorecard of the things you need to do with your site, or like, is there some place where you can like maybe drop a bunch of HTML, rendered HTML in to see, hey, what are the things you can do to improve?
Absolutely. There is a beautiful Chrome dev extension called the Wave tool, and that is created by WebAIM. That will go through your website and flag it with either errors or warnings. It'll say, hey, this image doesn't have alt text, or hey, this this looks like a heading visually, but it's not a heading. And you can use that tool on every page of your website. Unfortunately, it's only for Chrome. You can use that tool for your website. Oh, thank you so much for linking that. I have found that extremely useful. It's very easy to use. One other thing I really like about it is they have an option to disable CSS, which is what sometimes a lot of people do. A lot of people will disable CSS on the website so that they can get a clearer view. I believe on Safari and maybe on Firefox, there is a reader view. You can turn on a reader view that will strip a lot of the website of its styling down to the bare bones of just the headings and the bodies and the p tags, so it's easily consumable. So using that tool, using the Wave tool, the CSS strip tool, WebAIM also has an API. I have not explored this API at all. There is free up to a limit where you can, I think it's similar to running a kind of audit on your website. I know we briefly touched on it, but we went more into the Wave tool, and then with our auditors, Essential Accessibility, we started using their scans, but tools like that, they're very helpful. There is a Slack channel that I'm going to link right now. Oh, how do I link it? Invite people, copy invite link. I'm going to drop this in here. This accessibility Slack group is amazing. They actually have an accessibility Texas channel for if you wanted to do a meetup of any kind. They have so much. Ally Europe, Ally hacks, labeling, patterns, accessibility help, alt text suggestions, articles, assistive tech, automated testing, beginners, big picture, inclusive design. That's just a couple of their channels. This is a great way to kind of, dip your toes into the community and see what's going on just from your normal Slack window. Sorry if you don't use Slack. I know some companies don't. There's a very active Twitter community about developers and accessibility. I was not joking. I have a jokey Twitter account with funny profile picture, and I followed this guy and I tweeted at him from this joke account and said, what do you think about using this kind of alt text on this picture? And he legitimately answered me. I've tweeted at WebAIM and they've answered me. Everybody wants to help. Everybody is passionate about this. You will find allies everywhere.
Trying to think about some of the other things that I've kind of gone through with a lot of my line of business apps, because there's a number of feature sets that I try to provide, or that I insist that I'd like to provide on within the tool that's always there. Things like click to copy, and like some of the shading, I feel weird about. Like I put shading on certain things, but I know that like shading is one of those things that seems like it's kind of hard to use, because it's really hard to see shading like in a Zoom call. Some folks may not even see the shading, on their own desktop. And I know that folks have told me before that they have a hard time seeing some of the shading. And so it makes me kind of think of what are some other alternatives to things like that to be able to just have on a site, and be easy to implement, where like I can change some CSS to make it all work. I don't know, maybe I'm just talking out of my head right now. So
No, that's okay. What exactly do you mean by shading? Do you mean like something like going on in my background, like the gradient kind of style?
no, like if I have a bunch of text, but I want to kind of emphasize some text more than, or excuse me, I want to emphasize some text, but not make it bold because I don't really want to change the perspective of the lettering.
Mm-hmm.
And so like what I would end up doing is putting a background to those letters to like give an indication, like a different background to those letters to give an indication that that word or that phrase or whatever has is set aside from the rest of it. But basically like a visual cue, like it was more like a visual cue that this text is separate from the rest of this text, but without putting a lot of space in the page, because
Mm-hmm.
there could be a lot of text on the page. And so space is kind of a premium to some extent, especially if I can't go really wide with
Mm-hmm.
it. And so like I might have something that is kind of constrained to, oh, let's just say about as wide as GitHub is. Let's just go with
Yeah.
that, because right, GitHub does not expand out unless you do things to make it expand out, right? So
A good solution I found for that, and something we actually employ at Match, is we don't use the default bolding for fonts. When you're looking, like for example, if you look at Google Fonts, you can find several different levels of font weight. And I don't know what font library you use, but you can use different font weights to give emphasis to words, but not have them so like bold, because like the default bold is like, as you said, very strong. What I would also say is if you really did want to emphasize that text, what I would suggest is maybe considering the strong HTML tag. What that does visually is it creates a bolded text, but it also semantically shows that that is important text that the user needs to pay attention to. But you can use CSS to manipulate the text inside to appear not as bold, but maybe a lighter font weight, not font weight. I think it might be font weight, yeah.
okay, I see what you're saying. So in other words, using HTML to basically designate it, from a source code perspective, but apply the styling to soften those effects.
Yeah, so it's still bold, but not as bold.
Okay.
There are
I think,
also,
yeah. No, go ahead.
there's also ways to italicize text. You can italicize text through CSS, but there's specifically an EM tag, emphasis. When you wrap a word with that, it'll designate that as a emphasis. But it shouldn't, like the italics tag, the I tag, it shouldn't necessarily be used just to style text. In that case, you should use CSS, but there are built-in HTML tags for designating important text on your site. Like for example, I keep pointing at the wrong side. On Match, we have a premium, and it's like get premium now, and we want to italicize premium. So you can look at that and say, do I want to use CSS? Do I want to use an emphasis tag? And you can say, premium here is really important, so we're going to use an emphasis tag. But it's kind of the same as alt text. You have to like hone this ability to be able to look at a page and determine, should I use this tag? Should I use this tag? Should I use CSS?
That's an interesting perspective. I really didn't think about using the tags in that way. In other words, using the tag for like a reader emphasis rather than the styling. So yeah, I mean I like that perspective.
There's also a bit of dangerous HTML elements. I would say one of them is the BR tag. That one will create a line break. A lot of times I see that used for design, but what that actually says semantically is that there's an actual break in the content, which is good for a poem, for an address. But if you're using it to just break up a page a bit, it's not the best solution. So it's really, really small nuances like that. And like I said, don't expect perfection. Don't get discouraged. This is all stuff you just pick up as you go. Um, but there are some good communities out there, and that Slack channel I posted, they do have like that beginners channel, and they are very friendly. Like with most big online groups, you'll get some people who are like noob, but for the most part, people are they're pretty friendly. Everybody wants to make the web more accessible.
I agree. Does anyone else have any other questions? All right. Well, then thank you, Mackenzie, for joining us tonight. Really appreciated listening to your perspective of this. And you definitely given me some other ideas to think about on the line of business apps that I am in charge of. So I really appreciate that. And I have some other notes here for things that I can look in. And we've recorded this. This is going to be on YouTube. I think it's already on there now. I think Russell has kind of dealt with all of that and got that together. So on behalf of the North Dallas Developer Group, thank you, Mackenzie, for coming. Thank you, everyone else, for joining tonight. And have a great evening. Have a great Thanksgiving, and see you next month.
Thank you, Mackenzie.
Yeah, if y'all have any more questions, you can connect with me on LinkedIn or shoot them there, or Penton can give you my email. I'm always open to help with accessibility stuff. So,
All right. Thanks a lot.
thanks, guys.
All right. Have a good night.